4-week extension to England's lockdown has dashed the nation's hopes, as we all know now, of normal service resuming on June the 21st.
Boris Johnson says more time is needed to tackle the Delta variant and hasn't ruled out further delays. Well, Cabinet Officer Minister Michael Gove joins us now. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, Susanna. Hi.
It's good to see you this morning. It feels like we haven't seen you for a very long time. Just tell us, is this the end of it? Are we going to open up mid-July and no more lockdowns? Because there is a suspicion that there might be another variant. There is a suspicion that perhaps the number of people jabbed by that point won't be enough. And this will just get extended a little bit into the autumn. Then we face the flu season. Then we have the issue with the NHS not being able to cope again. Can you give us a promise that July the 19th will be the end of it?
Yes.
Well, that's absolutely categoric. I thought we were being led by the data, not the dates.
Yes, and the data shows that we should be in a position to have vaccinated so many people by that date in July that we will be able to lift restrictions. Now, you know, none of us can predict the future with 100% certainty. There could be something bizarre and unprecedented that occurs. But on the basis of all the information that we have, then we will have successfully protected such a large section of the population. And, of course, children will be facing summer holidays, and that brings the infection rate down. So we're as confident can be about that date.
Well, that was an unequivocal yes, and we'll take it as such. Susanna talks about the data, however you want to pronounce it, coming in and decisions being based on that. I'm really glad you're on the show this morning because I've been wanting to ask someone in your position this question for quite a few months now. Why is the government still relying on advice from a very discredited professional, Professor Neil Ferguson? Just to remind people, Professor Neil Ferguson was from Imperial College, was the one who really pushed lockdown at the beginning of all this, and then broke lockdown himself. He did what he told us we shouldn't do. He had someone round to his house that he shouldn't have had round. He broke lockdown, and it was all very embarrassing, and he stepped back. But increasingly, he's been rehabilitated. And the other thing about Professor Ferguson is that many of his, we call them models, many of his models pre-lockdown were simply wrong. He has a track record of massively exaggerating the outcome of epidemics and infections. He's got it wrong time after time after time. I could go through them, but I'd be here all morning. And then he broke lockdown himself. Why do you still have that guy on the team?
Well, we listen to lots of people. I mean, you know, Professor Ferguson is just one voice. I don't think what he did in his private life should affect the quality of his scientific research. But it's actually the case that we get a wide range of sets of advice from scientists. And overall, you know, we weigh the different bits of advice that we get. We look for what the best quality advice is and then act on that.
But his track record's awful. His predictions have been wrong time and time and time again.
No one has, throughout this pandemic, predicted everything with absolutely perfect foresight. Overall, and you know, it's just in the nature of science, models are attempts to understand what might happen. They can't be perfect predictions, but what you can do is look at a range of them and look at what the spectrum of risk might be.
OK, let me put to you another expert. Dr Geoffrey Barrett at the Wellcome Sanger Institute said a major part of why the UK is facing a growing wave of cases is because hundreds of infections were brought in from abroad in April. I think part of it is the UK got the intensity of importation over a period of a few weeks that set us on this trajectory. The fact of the matter is we were too late to shut out what was known back at the beginning of April as the India variant from India, weren't we?
No, I disagree with that, Susanna. I think that the first thing to say is that we put India on the red list before we knew that the Delta variant was a variant under investigation, before we knew that the Delta variant was a variant of concern.
We found out about the Delta variant being here on April the 1st. We didn't put India didn't go onto the red list until later on and was affected from April the 23rd.
Yeah, not quite right. We only knew that the Delta variant was a variant under investigation after April the 23rd, and we only knew it was a variant of concern after that as well.
Yeah,
so
but we knew that it was a variant that was here and originated from India right at the beginning of April. And on April the 2nd, we put Pakistan and Bangladesh on the red list, but it was only 17 days later that we put India on the red list. Now, you know, the fact of the matter is, NHS Test and Trace, March the 25th to April the 7th, showed that India had a positivity rate on arrivals of 5.1%, way more than Bangladesh with 3.7%. Whether we're going to quibble about the nature of the wording around the variant, the fact of the matter is there was an issue with COVID-positive travellers coming in from India, but we didn't shut the border until it was too late.
Well, I think you're mixing up a couple of things there. It's understandable, you know, because there's a lot of myth-making and propaganda out there.
I'm not myth-making, Mr. Gove.
Yes,
I'm talking about the positivity rate when it comes to COVID of travellers coming from India. I mean, surely that's of concern.
Yes, and two things. The first is that if you look at the positivity rate of people that were returning from Pakistan, and you look at the positivity rate of those who were returning from India in the period under question, the positivity rate of people returning from Pakistan was significantly higher.
Yep.
That's why the Joint Biosecurity...
In those figures, I didn't mention Pakistan. I talked about Bangladesh.
Yeah, no.
3.7% positivity rate on arrivals, and India 5.1%. So India had a higher positivity rate than Bangladesh, but Bangladesh was put onto the red list more than 2 weeks before India.
Because we looked at the positivity rate of people coming from those countries. There's a higher positivity rate in that earlier period, which is why we placed the restrictions on Pakistan and on Bangladesh. And you're also talking about figures, you know, going on to April the 7th. The decision was taken before that. So, you know, you can shift the goalposts, you can use different forms of data, but the truth is that the Joint Biosecurity Centre made recommendations, we followed those recommendations, and we used all of the information that we had at the time in order to be able to take those decisions.
But Mr. Gove, setting aside Susanna's very carefully researched and forensically delivered figures, which are unarguable, just setting them aside...
No, I think
hang on, let me finish the question.
Sorry, Mr. Gove, what do you mean? These are literally your figures from NHS Test and Trace. I can give you another figure. On April the 2nd, the case rates confirmed per million in Pakistan, 21, Bangladesh, 41, India, 64. I mean, India had a bigger problem at a time when we were not putting it on the red list. We have an expert saying the problem was we were getting these cases coming in from India. Why was India put on the red list so late? You can scoff at these figures. These are NHS, PHE figures showing that we were exposed to infections, and particularly from the Delta variant, and we left the border to India open too long.
No. The first point to make is that, as I said earlier, the positivity rate for people returning from Pakistan was higher. It was also the case that we acted on the basis of...
Bangladesh, it was lower.
Susanna, I think it's important that we look at all of the facts. I know that there's a particular prosecution case that you want to make. The point I would make is that all of the evidence that we had and all of the evidence that we were given was that this was not a variant under investigation or a variant of concern until after we had placed India on the red list.
The point I was going to make there, and Susanna was quite right to come in with more figures to back up her point, is this. Didn't it really come down to a matter of simple common sense? I can recall, before these figures became available to the public, I can recall coming in from the kitchen to watch the early evening news with my wife and her turning to me very early on, long before India was stopped from coming here, and saying, they're still letting people from India come in. And this was after these horrendous pictures that were coming out of the subcontinent of people dying in huge numbers and huge numbers of funeral pyres. And I said, you're joking? She said, no, they're still coming in. We had that conversation as a normal couple watching the TV news for about 14 days before finally the hole was plugged. Surely you must have sensed and suspected that something very, very bad was happening. Why didn't you move earlier to stop it? Forget the detailed figures for now. It was a matter of common sense, wasn't it? If my wife could say it, watching the news, why couldn't you see it?
Well, I would never argue with your wife, but one.
No, neither do I. But anyway, go on.
Thank you. But one of the things that I would say is that there are UK citizens in India who wanted to return, but anyone coming from India before we imposed the red list restrictions would have to test before flying, and then they would have to self-isolate here in the UK for 10 days at home, taking a test on the 2nd day and the 8th day as well.
All right. Listen, before we finish this, I'm glad we majored on this because it's so important. It's why we are where we are now, obviously. What about enforcement of these wedding regulations? We saw some extraordinary footage from a church back at Easter where the police were called because it was felt that the church was in breach, the congregation was in breach of the lockdown rules, and the police arrived and basically shut the whole thing down, shut the service down. If there is dancing at an inside wedding reception, which is now banned and is subject to
dances with her
if the
father.
bride dances with her father and others take to the floor, are the police going to be sent round?
I think we'll use common sense. It is the case that the bride and groom are expected, allowed, encouraged to have a first dance, but it's also the case that we're not opening dance floors for weddings because we're not opening them elsewhere as well. It's 4 weeks. After this 4-week period, then I hope that we can get things back to normal. In the meantime, there are restrictions, but overall, I think, common sense is the answer.
And what about, it seems to be the equivalent of an orange zone. At weddings where the reception takes place outside in a garden, in grounds or in a marquee with the signs up, dancing is allowed, but it's just like the orange zone countries. You're saying, but we'd rather you didn't. Again, it's conflicting, it's ambiguous.
Well, the truth is that throughout the pandemic, it's always been the case that the line has to be drawn somewhere, and the line can never be perfectly drawn. And one can always point out to inconsistencies here or there. And in fact, I'm giving a speech a wee bit later today on government reform, looking back at the whole of the last year and a bit, looking at the mistakes, and the government has made mistakes that we've made, and attempting to draw some appropriate lessons about what we can do better in the future.
And finally, sorry, Susanna.
No, I was just going to say, would you acknowledge that one of the mistakes was allowing the Delta variant to become the dominant variant rather than stopping it at the door?
Well, we've gone over that ground, but I think that the most important thing to learn is that there were some parts of what government did which were magnificent. So the vaccination programme led by Kate Bingham and the work of people in the front line of the NHS. But there was other stuff that we didn't do so well. So if you look back to the beginning of the pandemic, some of the issues around the procurement of PPE and so on. But on the basis of the situation in India, I think we acted on the basis of the best information that we had at the time.
All right. And in not much more than a sentence, because we're pretty much over time, but I do want to put this to you. We interviewed Earl Spencer a few minutes ago live on the programme, and he completely rejects the statement made by the BBC yesterday about the rehiring of Martin Bashir. You know that story. In 2016, the BBC say that the executives that hired him had no idea about the forgeries that he was responsible and had admitted to the BBC for committing all those years before. Do you buy their statement?
I haven't looked at it in depth. I'm inclined to give people the benefit of the doubt. But the other thing is that Earl Spencer is obviously someone who's gone through immense pain and grief. And so, I sympathise with him. But I wouldn't want to arraign any BBC executives because I haven't had a chance to study things in the depth that they deserve.
OK.
OK, sorry, you did just mention that you thought the biggest mistake, after you talked about the successes, the biggest mistake was about procurement of PPE. Can I just double check? Because Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, told the parliamentary inquiry there was never a national shortage of PPE.
Well, I think the two things are correct. We never ran out. Absolutely never ran out.
Really?
But it is also the case that...
Why were medical staff wearing bin bags at the beginning of the crisis?
One of the things that we've already commissioned a report by a very eminent lawyer called Nigel Boardman, is how we went about procurement. We didn't get everything right, but there was a worldwide shortage at the time, but we never ran out.
All right, Mr. Gove, good to talk to you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
OK, thank you.